The rift opened without warning. One moment the USS Enterprise F was holding position at the edge of a transwarp corridor test zone, her crew running calibration sequences on the experimental slipstream drive that Starfleet Corps of Engineers had spent 3 years developing. The next, every console on the bridge exploded with cascading error alerts. The view screen went white, and Lieutenant Commander Truvok's tactical readouts dissolved into static. The ship shuddered, not the familiar shudder of phaser impact or torpedo concussion, but something deeper, something that vibrated through the hull plating like the universe itself was rejecting them. Then silence. Admiral Joanna Bateman gripped the armrests of her command chair and waited for the bridge to stop spinning. Around her, the senior staff were pulling themselves upright, running damage checks, their voices overlapping in the practiced cadence of Starfleet officers who had trained for catastrophe and expected to survive it. "Report," she said. Her voice was level. It was always level. Chief Engineer Vorak, a Vulcan whose composure had never once cracked in 11 years of service, looked up from his secondary console with an expression that, on a human face, would have been described as deeply unsettled. "Admiral, warp drive is offline. Plasma conduits on decks 7 through 12 have ruptured. Shields are at 68%. Transwarp assembly," he paused. "The transwarp assembly no longer registers on internal sensors. It may no longer be aboard the ship." "Navigation," Bateman said. Ensign Dara Yun at the helm turned slowly in her chair. She was 26 years old and had never seen combat. She looked, Bateman thought, precisely like someone who had just discovered that the universe was larger and stranger than any academy course had prepared her for. "Admiral, I have no navigational reference points. None of our star charts match the stellar cartography I'm reading. The constellations," she shook her head. "They don't exist. None of them exist." Bateman let that settle over the bridge for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood. "Shields to maximum of available capacity. All decks condition yellow. I want a full sensor sweep of our immediate vicinity, and I want it in 10 minutes. Vorak, get me warp capability on a timeline. Counselor Reyes, I want a crew welfare assessment within the hour. Nobody panics. We've been lost before." She didn't say, "Not like this." She didn't need to. What the sensors returned in those 10 minutes was, in the clinical language of Starfleet science, extraordinary. In the plain language that Lieutenant Commander Sarah Obi used when she delivered her preliminary report, it was impossible. The stellar cartography matched no known region of the Milky Way, no charted neighbor galaxy, no theoretical spatial anomaly on record. The local star was real, a yellow-white dwarf approximately 0.97 solar masses, but the planets orbiting it bore no resemblance to any cataloged system. More pressingly, long-range sensors were detecting an ecosystem of artificial structures, starships, orbital stations, surface installations, of a technological profile that matched nothing in the Federation database. They had propulsion technology, significant propulsion technology, given the energy signatures Obi was reading. But it wasn't warp drive. It wasn't ion drive in any configuration Starfleet recognized. It was something older and brasher, something that burned at the edges of Obi's sensors like a fire in a different color than fire was supposed to burn. "There are multiple vessels in this system," Obi reported from the science station, her voice careful and precise. "At least 2 configurations. The larger ones are approximately 1,600 meters in length, wedge-shaped, high mass. They appear to be operating in formation around a central body, a moon, I think, though it's giving me some unusual readings. The smaller vessels are scattered. Some appear to be in distress." "Weapon signatures?" Bateman asked. "Everywhere," Obi said quietly. Bateman walked to the view screen and stood there for a moment, looking at the unfamiliar stars. Somewhere behind her, she could hear the soft voices of her crew, working the problem with the methodical focus that Starfleet training produced. Not fearlessness, because fear was information, but discipline, which was what you did with fear. A galaxy that shouldn't exist, warships the size of small cities, weapons fire on sensors, and a crew of 2,500 people looking to her for the shape of what happened next. She had been an admiral for 6 years. Before that, a captain for 9. Before that, a tactical officer who had served through the Dominion War's aftermath and the Borg incursions and 3 separate diplomatic crises that had come within hours of becoming shooting wars. She had made hard calls before. She suspected she was about to make harder ones. "Helm," she said, Take us to 1/4 impulse. Move us away from that moon. There's too much traffic near it, and I don't want us caught in anyone's patrol lane while we're still half blind. Science. I want a full spectral analysis of the local atmosphere and biosphere of every planet in this system. Communications. Begin passive monitoring of all frequencies. Do not transmit yet. Aye, Admiral. And someone, she added, turning back to her chair, get me a cup of coffee. It's going to be a long day. The Enterprise F slid silently through the dark, a ghost from another universe, moving carefully between the stars of a galaxy that had no name for what she was. On the surface of a desert moon called Jeddah, 40,000 meters below and shrouded in dust and faith and imperial occupation, the ground shook with the boots of stormtroopers, and in the cold mathematics of Imperial command, a weapon was nearly ready to change everything. The Enterprise had arrived 3 days before history would break. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer Devastator had been patrolling the Jeddah system for 11 days when her sensors picked up the anomaly. Commander Voss Drath, the Devastator's executive officer, was a precise man who had built his career on the reliable interpretation of data. He did not believe in anomalies. He believed in incomplete information, which was a different thing entirely, and he had spent 20 years in Imperial service, learning to complete it quickly and brutally. So when the ensign at the sensor station reported an unidentified vessel of unknown configuration appearing at the system's edge, no hyperspace exit signature, no IFF transponder, no registration in any Imperial database, Drath did not say that's impossible. He said, battle stations. Set an intercept course. I want a full sensor lock in 5 minutes. The Devastator came about with the slow, terrible grace of a 2-kilometer wedge of durasteel and weapon systems, her turbolaser banks rotating toward the contact bearing, her TIE fighter complement spinning up in the hangar bays below. She was a machine built for one purpose, and she was very good at it. Aboard the Enterprise F, Lieutenant Obi saw her coming. Admiral, the large wedge-shaped vessel, one of them has broken formation and is moving toward us. Speed approximately 0.3 light. She'll be within visual range in 8 minutes. Bateman set down her coffee. Weapon system status? Targeting arrays are online. Truvok reported from Tactical. Phaser banks charged. Quantum torpedo launchers are ready. I should note, Admiral, my preliminary analysis of that vessel's weapons profile suggests energy-based turret systems, projectile-adjacent munitions. Powerful, but our shields should handle initial contact. I didn't ask you to prepare for contact, Commander. I asked for status. Understood, Admiral. Bateman studied the view screen. The Star Destroyer was resolving now from a sensor ghost into something visible, an enormous angular shape, lit from below by the amber glow of Jeddah's atmosphere, moving with the unhurried confidence of a vessel that had never encountered anything it couldn't destroy. It was, she thought, an extraordinarily aggressive-looking ship. Nothing about its design suggested exploration or diplomacy or any of the other things that Starfleet put on its vessels as architectural philosophy. It was a weapon that happened to have crew quarters. Open a channel, she said. Admiral? Obi began. I know. We don't know their language. Run the universal translator in active learning mode. Let it work with whatever they send us. Passive translation has had 40 minutes of their communication frequencies. It should have something. The hail went out across a frequency that the Enterprise's computer had identified as the most active in the local communication spectrum. There was a silence of approximately 4 seconds. Then the view screen shifted, and Bateman found herself looking at a man in a gray uniform with the rigid posture and cold eyes of someone who had spent his entire career being obeyed. Commander Drath looked at the view screen on his own bridge and saw something that stopped his carefully ordered mind completely still for just a moment. The vessel on his sensors was unlike anything in Imperial records, smooth-hulled where Imperial ships were angular, lit with a blue-white running light configuration that suggested an entirely different design philosophy, roughly 700 meters in length, and generating an energy signature that his science officer was describing as without precedent. And the woman looking back at him, across whatever communication technology this ship employed, was wearing a uniform he'd never seen, sitting in a command chair that looked more like a piece of furniture than a battle station. The translation was rough. The universal translator was still learning, still finding the grammatical architecture of Galactic Basic, but the meaning came through clearly enough. This is Admiral Joanna Bateman of the Federation Starship Enterprise. We have arrived in your system without prior arrangement, and we mean no harm to any vessel or installation. We request only information and, if possible, assistance with our navigational situation. We are prepared to discuss the terms of contact at your convenience. Drath stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of aggression against the Galactic Empire." Bateman's expression did not change. "We don't have weapons powered up, Commander, and we won't be boarded. But I'd genuinely like to talk." Drath cut the channel. "Charge all turbo laser banks. I want a firing solution on that vessel in 90 seconds. On the Enterprise bridge, Truvok looked up from his console. "They've powered their weapons, Admiral. Energy buildup consistent with directed energy turret systems. Significant yield. I'm estimating equivalent to approximately 4 photon torpedoes per salvo, sustained rate of fire. Shields to maximum." "Admiral," Counselor Reyes said carefully from her station to the left of the command chair. Their communication suggested a hierarchical military structure with an emphasis on immediate compliance. The boarding request wasn't a negotiating position. It was an order. They may not have a cultural framework for refusal that doesn't read as combat initiation. "I know," Bateman said. "Helm, come to heading 270, increase to half impulse. Take us around the planet's northern pole. I want that atmosphere between us and their firing line. Truvok, do not return fire under any circumstances without my direct order. Obi, keep scanning. I want to know everything about this system before that ship catches us." The Enterprise banked and ran, not in panic, but in the precise, calculated way that Starfleet tactical doctrine described as strategic repositioning. The Star Destroyer turned to follow, slower but relentless, her turbo lasers firing warning shots that lit up the darkness in brilliant green. The shots fell short, but only barely, and on Jedha's surface below, in a city full of pilgrims and occupied streets, and a kyber crystal temple that the Empire had been systematically dismantling for months, nobody looked up. They had learned not to look at the sky. The sky only ever brought more Imperials. Until today, they were right. The rebel courier ship was called the Whisper, and she was held together by prayer, carbon scoring, and the mechanical stubbornness of her Togruta pilot, a woman named Sarah Voss, who had been running intelligence packets for the Alliance for 3 years and had never once been intercepted. Her record ended in the Jedha system. The Imperial patrol that found her was a 2-ship TIE fighter element operating on a standard sweep pattern, and they were on her before her sensors even registered the threat. Sarah punched the engines, dropped below the planetary ecliptic, and did everything the Alliance flight manual told her to do, which was not enough, because the TIEs were faster and the Whisper's shields were already at 40% from a debris strike 2 days prior. She took 3 hits. The hyperdrive motivator cracked. The port engine began burning in a way that smelled like melting insulation and bad decisions. She was preparing a distress burst on the Alliance emergency frequency when her proximity alert screamed, not the Imperial tone she'd been dreading, but something else entirely, something her console couldn't identify. A vessel moving at a speed her instruments rendered incorrectly 3 times before settling on a number that seemed physically implausible, sliding out of Jedha's shadow on an intercept course that was either a rescue or a collision. She had just enough time to think what in the... before a column of shimmering golden-white light filled her cockpit, and the world dissolved. She materialized on the transporter pad of the Enterprise F with her hand on her blaster, her flight suit smelling of smoke, and her heart doing something that a physician would later describe as a sustained threat response. 2 security officers in unfamiliar uniforms stood at a respectful distance, hands open, weapons holstered. A third figure, a tall woman with dark skin and the calm eyes of someone accustomed to very difficult conversations, stood at the edge of the pad and said, in accented but recognizable Galactic Basic, "You're safe. My name is Counselor Reyes. Please don't shoot anyone. We have a lot to discuss." Sarah kept her blaster out for another 4 seconds. Then she holstered it because the room she was in was unlike any ship interior she had ever seen, and the people around her were looking at her with expressions of professional concern rather than imperial contempt. And something in her gut, the same instinct that had kept her alive for 3 years of courier runs, said, "These are not enemies." "Where's my ship?" she demanded. "Being held in a tractor beam approximately 200 meters off our port bow," Reyes said. "We can return you to it, once it's been repaired, if you'd like. Our engineering team says the hyperdrive motivator is a straightforward fix, perhaps 2 hours." Sarah stared at her. "You pulled me off my ship. We pulled you out of a deteriorating combat situation," Reyes said. "The distinction matters to us." "It matters to me too," Sarah said. "I had cargo. The intelligence packets in your cargo bay are untouched. We haven't accessed them. We don't actually know what they are." Reyes paused. "Though given that you were running from Imperial fighters, and given some of what our sensors have been observing on the surface of Jeddah, I have some educated guesses." Sarah looked at her carefully. "Who are you people?" "That," Reyes said, "is a longer answer than either of us has time for right now. But the short version is, we're not Imperial, we're not local, and we're trying very hard not to make things worse. Would you be willing to speak with our admiral?" Cassian Andor had not been on the Whisper. He had been on Jeddah for 6 days, working a source inside the Holy City who had information about the Empire's Kyber crystal extraction operation. He was there when the city began to feel it. Not a sound exactly, more a pressure change, a subsonic wrongness that the oldest residents recognized as the precursor to something catastrophic. He was there when his source went silent. He was there when the Imperial garrison doubled its street presence and the checkpoints went from 3 to 7 in the space of an afternoon. He was also there, crouched on a rooftop above the Tythoni Square Market, when his comlink picked up a burst transmission on a frequency that wasn't Rebel, wasn't Imperial, wasn't anything in his considerable experience of Alliance intelligence work. It was using a modulation pattern so clean and so structurally alien that his comlink's decryption algorithm ran for 40 seconds and then returned a result that said, essentially, language recognized, origin unknown, content as follows. "This is the Federation Starship Enterprise broadcasting on all available frequencies. We are a vessel of exploration and peaceful contact, currently engaged by Imperial forces in this system. We are not affiliated with any local political entity. If there are parties in this system operating in opposition to the Imperial military, we would welcome communication. We mean no harm, please respond." Cassian read it twice. Then he read it a third time, slowly, the way he read things that seemed too good to be true, and usually were. A vessel of exploration, not affiliated with any local political entity, engaged by Imperial forces. He looked up at the sky, where the distant flicker of weapons fire was painting brief green lines across the upper atmosphere. Something up there was fighting an Imperial Star Destroyer, and apparently surviving it. He had been in Alliance intelligence long enough to know that the enemy of his enemy was not automatically his friend. He had also been in it long enough to know that you didn't ignore a resource like this. He keyed his comlink and sent a response on the same frequency. "Enterprise. This is a friend. What are you offering?" The reply came in 11 seconds. "Conversation, information, and, if you need it, a safe place to stand." Cassian Andor looked at the green fire in the sky for a long moment. K2SO, standing beside him with the patient immobility of a reprogrammed Imperial security droid, said, "Statistically, this is probably a trap." "Yeah," Cassian said. "Probably." He transmitted his coordinates anyway. The transporter room had seen a lot in the past 18 hours. It had received a smoke-stained rebel courier pilot who had arrived with her hand on her blaster. It had processed a 2-meter Imperial security droid whose structural density had required a manual override of the matter buffer safeties. And now it received Cassian Andor, who materialized on the pad with the controlled stillness of a man who had decided, somewhere between the coordinates he'd transmitted and the golden light that had taken him apart and put him back together, that he was going to treat this exactly like every other impossible situation he had survived, which was to say, with patience, observation, and the absolute readiness to shoot his way out if necessary. He looked at the transporter room. He looked at the security officers. He looked at K2SO, who had materialized beside him and was already running what was obviously a threat assessment of everyone in the room. "The tall one near the door has a 94.7% probability of being able to physically restrain me," K2SO announced. "The others are less concerning." "Thank you, K," Cassian said, Admiral Bateman was waiting for them in the observation lounge on Deck 7, which Counselor Reyes had chosen because it had large windows and a view of the stars, and in her experience, large windows and a view of the stars had a measurable calming effect on first contacts who might otherwise feel trapped. Sarah Voss was already there, sitting with a cup of something hot that the food synthesizer had produced when she'd described, haltingly, what CAF was. She looked at Cassian with the expression of someone who had been trying to explain the inexplicable for 2 hours and was relieved to have backup. Bateman waited until Cassian had taken a seat. He chose the one nearest the door, which she noted, and then she said, "I'm going to tell you the truth, because I find it's usually faster. We don't know where we are. We arrived in this system by accident. We have no political agenda here, no military objective, and no particular loyalty to any faction in whatever conflict is currently underway. What we do have is significant sensor capability, significant tactical capability, and a crew of 2,500 people who are trying very hard to understand a situation that is, from our perspective, entirely without precedent." Cassian looked at her for a moment. "You're not from this galaxy. We're not from this galaxy. And the ship that's been chasing you for the last 3 hours is currently holding position approximately 40,000 kilometers off our stern," Bateman said. "They've stopped firing, which I'm choosing to interpret as a tactical reassessment rather than a ceasefire. Our shields have held. We haven't returned fire." K2SO, who had remained standing near the door with the air of a droid who found chairs philosophically unnecessary, said, "Your energy weapons are significantly more efficient than Imperial turbolasers. Why haven't you destroyed them?" "Because we don't destroy ships full of people as a tactical preference," Bateman said. K2SO processed this. "That is an impractical philosophy for a war." "We're not at war," Bateman said. "We're lost." It was Sarah Voss who broke the silence that followed, setting down her cup and leaning forward, with the directness of someone who had decided that the situation was too serious for careful diplomacy. "The Empire is going to come back with more ships. They always do. Whatever you are, wherever you're from, they're not going to let an unknown vessel operate in this system without understanding what it is and how to counter it. You don't have the luxury of being neutral." "She's right," Cassian said. "The Empire doesn't negotiate with things it doesn't understand. It dissects them." He paused. "How long until your faster-than-light capability is restored?" "Warp drive. Our primary propulsion, approximately 40 hours, Bateman said. "We're not going anywhere quickly." Cassian nodded slowly, filing that away. "Then we have a common problem. You need time. We need—" He stopped, and Bateman watched something move across his face. Not indecision, but the particular calculation of an intelligence officer deciding how much to reveal. "We need information. We have a source who may know details about an Imperial weapons project. A significant one." "How significant?" Reyes asked. Cassian looked at the stars through the observation window for a moment. Then he said, "There's a weapon, a station, though that word doesn't quite cover it. The Empire has been building it for years. We don't know everything about it, but we know it's almost finished, and we know what it does." He turned back to Bateman. "It destroys planets." The observation lounge was very quiet. Bateman's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. A shift from the careful neutrality of a Starfleet officer in a first contact situation to something older and colder and considerably more alarmed. In Federation history, there were weapons that had threatened planets. The Doomsday Machine, Genesis, the Metreon Cascade. She knew what planet killers looked like in the aftermath. She had studied the records. "One weapon," she said, "capable of destroying a planet." "One shot," Cassian said. "That's what our intelligence suggests." Bateman stood and walked to the observation window. Below them, Jedah's amber surface rolled past, ancient and scarred by occupation, its holy city a cluster of lights in the desert darkness. 40,000 people, Obi's sensors had estimated. Maybe more. She stood there for 11 seconds, she counted, later, because she wanted to know how long it had taken her to make the decision. "Counselor," she said, "please have Commander Obi join us. And get Vorak on the comm. I want to know if we can have warp capability in 30 hours instead of 40. She turned from the window. "Captain Andor, tell me everything you know about this weapon and where it came from." Cassian Andor, who had not told anyone outside the Alliance his rank in 3 years, didn't correct her on the title. He started talking. The senior staff meeting convened at 0300 ship's time in the main briefing room on Deck 3. And Admiral Bateman had not slept, and neither had anyone else, and the coffee was very strong, and the holographic display in the center of the table was showing a rotating schematic of something that Lieutenant Commander Obi had assembled from Cassian's intelligence fragments, Sarah Voss's courier data packets, and 40 hours of passive sensor analysis. It looked like a moon. It was not a moon. What our sensors are reading at the edge of this system, Obi said, advancing the display with a gesture, is consistent with Captain Andor's description. Mass approximately 1.15 times that of a standard Class D planetoid. But the energy signature is entirely artificial. There's a concave dish structure on the surface. We initially read it as an atmospheric anomaly, but the geometry is too precise. It's a weapon emitter. She paused. The power readings coming from its core are unlike anything in our database. We're not talking about a phaser array or a torpedo launcher scaled up. We're talking about a fundamentally different approach to directed energy, something that channels and focuses stellar-scale power output through a single point. A super laser, Cassian said. He was sitting at the far end of the table, K2SO standing at parade rest behind him, Sarah Voss beside him, with a datapad she'd been filling with notes since the conversation began. That's what our source called it. Your source being Galen Erso, Bateman said. Formerly. He's on Iedu now. Imperial Research Installation. He built the thing, or rather, he was forced to build it. Our intelligence suggests he may have hidden a flaw in the design, a vulnerability. Cassian's voice was level, but his jaw was tight. Our mission was to extract him or eliminate him, depending on what we found. The briefing room was silent, except for the hum of the ship's systems. Commander Truvok spoke first, because tactical officers had a professional obligation to say the uncomfortable things. Admiral, I want to be precise about our situation. Our warp drive is offline for a minimum of 30 hours. Our shields are at 71% following the engagement with the Star Destroyer. We have a full complement of quantum torpedoes, and our phaser arrays are operating at 100% capacity. We are, tactically speaking, a significant force. In isolation. Against an installation of that size, with whatever fleet assets the Empire can bring to bear, we are insufficient. We're not fighting it, Bateman said. Admiral, we are not, she said, with the particular quiet emphasis that her crew had learned meant the discussion was over, on that specific point, going to attack a military installation the size of a small moon with a single starship. That's not a battle plan. It's a suicide note. She looked around the table. What we are going to do is think. Counselor, you've been quiet. Reyes had been watching Cassian since the briefing began, with the careful attention that was her professional specialty. Not surveillance, but the deep reading of a person under pressure. I've been listening, she said. Captain Andor, when you said your mission was to extract Galen Erso or eliminate him, which were you planning? The question landed precisely where she'd intended it to. Cassian's expression didn't break, but something around his eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. That depended on what we found. And what does it depend on now? Now, he said slowly, I think the calculus has changed. Because of us, Bateman said. Because of your transporters, Cassian said. You pulled Sarah off a disintegrating ship from 200 kilometers away in the middle of an evasive maneuver. If you can do that, if you can put a targeting lock on a single person inside an Imperial research facility and remove them without a ground assault, he stopped. Galen Erso doesn't have to die. He just has to be somewhere else. Vorak, who had been running calculations on a separate pad since the meeting began, looked up. Transporter targeting through an Imperial facility's hull is not a trivial operation. We would need precise coordinates, minimal interference from internal shielding, and a window of approximately 90 seconds during which the target is in a location with sufficient signal penetration. Can it be done? Bateman asked. With preparation, Vorak said, and with information we do not currently possess about the facility's internal layout. Yes, Cassian leaned forward. I have partial schematics, enough to identify the research wing. And I have a contact on Edu, a worker inside the facility. She can get Erso to a position we specify, if she's given enough time. Bateman looked at him for a long moment. You came prepared for a lot of contingencies. I'm an intelligence officer, Cassian said. Contingencies are the job. It was Sarah Voss who said what the room was circling. Admiral, I need to ask you something directly. Your prime directive, Andor explained it to me while we were waiting. Non-interference in the affairs of other civilizations. She held Bateman's gaze. Does it apply here? Because if it does, and you pull back, that station is going to be used. Maybe on Jeddah, maybe on somewhere else. And the death toll is going to be... I know what the death toll will be, Bateman said quietly. Then I need to know, Sarah said, whether you're actually going to help us, or whether you're going to find a reason not to. The observation window behind Bateman showed Jeddah rotating slowly below them, patient and ancient, and full of people who had no idea that the sky above them was about to make a decision about their lives. Bateman thought about the prime directive. She thought about what it was for, what principle it was actually protecting, beneath the regulatory language. It existed to prevent the Federation from imposing its will on civilizations with the right to determine their own fate, but a civilization couldn't determine its fate if it was ash. The Prime Directive, she said finally, was written for civilizations at peace, for cultures developing on their own trajectory. It was not written for a situation where one party has a weapon capable of ending a planet and the political will to use it. She stood. We're going to Edu. Vorak, I want transporter range and targeting solutions ready within 6 hours. Truvok, prepare a tactical profile for operating in atmosphere near an Imperial installation. Andor, she looked at him. Contact your source on Edu. Tell her we're coming. Cassian Andor nodded once and reached for his comlink, and somewhere on a rain-soaked Imperial research station, the course of the rebellion shifted without anyone on either side yet knowing it. Eadu was a planet that seemed to have been designed by someone who found misery aesthetically pleasing. It was a world of perpetual storm, not the dramatic, lightning-split storms of a planet with seasons and weather patterns and the occasional break in the clouds, but the gray, grinding, absolute storms of a world that had simply decided that rain was its permanent condition and light was an occasional mistake. The Enterprise F descended through its upper atmosphere on impulse power, running without navigational lights, her hull darkened to minimum emission profile, moving through the cloud layer like a thought through a troubled mind, present but undetectable, if you weren't looking for exactly the right things. Truvok was watching for exactly the right things. Imperial garrison, ground level, perimeter of the research installation. Approximately 200 stormtroopers, standard patrol rotation. 6 Layhat equivalent atmospheric gunships on the landing platform. Different design, similar tactical profile. 2 Star Destroyer-class vessels in high orbit, neither in position to achieve firing solution on our current location. He paused. There is also what appears to be a rebel strike force approaching from the southern hemisphere. 8 T-65 X-Wing equivalent fighters and a larger transport. They will reach the installation in approximately 22 minutes. Bateman looked at Cassian. Is that yours? Cassian's expression was complicated. It shouldn't be. My mission was independent, but if Alliance Command received the same intelligence I did about Urso's location, they sent a strike team without knowing you were here, Sarah finished. It happens, Cassian said, with the tone of a man for whom it happened more often than he would prefer. The Alliance doesn't always coordinate as well as it should. 22 minutes, Bateman said. Vorak, where are we on transporter targeting? Vorak was at a secondary station he'd had installed in the tactical bay specifically for this operation, his fingers moving across the console with the precise efficiency of a Vulcan engineer who had been awake for 29 hours and was choosing not to acknowledge it. I have partial resolution on the research wing. The facility's internal structure is interfering with targeting. There is a dense durasteel superstructure in the lower levels that scatters the annular confinement beam. I can achieve reliable targeting on the upper levels and the external platform areas. If our contact can move Urso to an exposed position, she said she could get him to the landing platform access corridor, Cassian said. Level 3, north side. Is that sufficient? Vorak ran the calculation. Marginally. I would want him within 10 meters of an exterior wall. Signal penetration through Imperial durasteel at that thickness gives us a 73% reliable lock. And the other 27%? Sarah asked. Vorak looked at her with the expression of a man who felt that the question answered itself. Is why we will ask him to stand very still. Bateman turned to the comm station. Open a channel on the frequency Andor, established with his contact. Tight beam, encrypted, minimum emission signature. The channel opened with a burst of static that the universal translator smoothed into something almost comprehensible. A woman's voice, low and careful, speaking in the clipped cadence of someone who was trying to sound like she was doing something routine while doing something extremely dangerous. Her name was Bodhi. She had worked at the EDU facility for 2 years as a cargo pilot, moving equipment between the research station and Imperial supply vessels. She had met Galen Erso on his 3rd week at the facility, when he had helped her recalibrate a faulty loading arm without being asked and without expecting anything in return, and she had decided then that whatever this gentle, sad-eyed scientist had done to end up in an Imperial research installation in the middle of a storm planet, it wasn't his fault. She had been his quiet ally ever since. She had never, in 2 years of careful, terrified alliance, expected to relay coordinates to a starship from another galaxy. "He knows," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told him someone was coming. I didn't tell him everything. I didn't know how to explain." "You don't need to explain," Bateman said, and her voice through the comm had the particular quality that her crew recognized as her command tone stripped down to its essence. Calm without being cold, certain without being cruel. "Just get him to the North Corridor, Level 3, within 15 minutes. Can you do that?" A pause. Rain hammering against whatever surface Bodhi was standing near. The distant sound of stormtrooper boots on a metal floor. "Yes," Bodhi said. "I can do that." The channel closed. Galen Erso had been working for 14 hours when Bodhi found him, which was normal because he worked for 14 hours most days because the alternative was thinking, and thinking led him to places he could not afford to go and remain functional. He was a tall man, thin in the way of someone who had been given adequate food and inadequate peace, with the careful hands of a scientist and the eyes of a man carrying a weight that had no physical measurement. He looked at Bodhi when she appeared at his laboratory door and read her face with the accuracy of someone who had learned to interpret small signals in a place where small signals were the only warnings you got. "Now," he said quietly. "Now," she said. He saved his work, not out of loyalty to the Empire, but because the flaw he had spent 3 years carefully embedding in the Death Star's reactor design was in those files, and he would not lose it. Not now, not when it might finally matter. And he followed her into the corridor. On the Enterprise, Vorak watched the biosyn he'd been tracking for 9 minutes move into position near an exterior wall on the north side of the facility, and said, "I have a lock." "Energize," Bateman said. The transporter hummed. In the north corridor of the Ado Imperial Research Station, Galen Erso dissolved into golden light 12 seconds before the first rebel bombs fell from the storm clouds above, and 6 seconds before a piece of shrapnel from the first explosion would have killed him where he stood. He materialized on the Enterprise transporter pad shaking, from the cold, from the shock, from something that was not quite either of those things, and looked at the 2 security officers and the counselor and the intelligence officer he recognized from Rebel intelligence briefings he had seen years ago, and he said, in a voice that was barely holding together, "Is my daughter safe?" Cassian Andor looked at him and said, "Not yet, but we're going to fix that." The Battle of Anudu orbit lasted 41 minutes, and changed the tactical calculus of everything that followed. It began when the 2 Imperial Star Destroyers in high orbit detected the Enterprise 5 emerging from the cloud layer with a Rebel transport on her sensor shadow, close enough that the Imperial targeting computers, for 3 critical seconds, registered them as a single contact. By the time the error resolved, the Enterprise had put 17,000 kilometers between herself and the Rebel vessel, and Truvok had already mapped the firing arcs of both Star Destroyers with the methodical precision of a tactical officer who had been thinking about this problem since the first engagement near Jeddah. "Admiral, the Star Destroyers are moving to intercept. The lead vessel is the Adjudicator. I've been tracking her command patterns since she appeared on sensors. Her captain favors aggressive forward positioning. He'll want to bracket us against the planet's gravity well." Truvok's hands moved across the tactical console without urgency, which was either reassuring or alarming, depending on how well you knew him. "I recommend we don't let him." "Agreed. Helm, full impulse, heading 045 Mark 12. Take us up and out of the ecliptic. I want room to maneuver." Bateman turned. "Truvok, What are we dealing with in terms of their weapons yield? Turbolaser batteries. I'm reading approximately 300 individual emitters across both vessels. Sustained fire from one Star Destroyer is survivable with shields at current capacity. Sustained fire from both simultaneously is not. He paused. However, their targeting systems appear to rely on a sensor modality that our hull profile disrupts. We are, to their computers, a very confusing object. They are compensating manually, which introduces a reaction delay of approximately 4 seconds per targeting solution. 4 seconds is a lot, Obi said from the science station. In tactical terms, Truvok said, 4 seconds is an era. The adjudicator opened fire first, a broadside of green turbo-laser energy that lit up the space between the ships, like a lightning storm compressed into a straight line. The Enterprise's shields took the impact and held. Vorak reported a 12% drop, shields redistributing automatically, and the ship heeled away on Helm Ensign Yoon's instinctive evasive pattern before Bateman had finished saying, evasive. Yoon, Bateman said. Sorry, Admiral, reflex. Don't apologize, do it again. The second Star Destroyer, the Implacable, was coming around Idu's northern pole on an intercept vector that would put her between the Enterprise and open space in approximately 6 minutes. It was a sound tactical maneuver. Close the exit, let the first ship push the target into the closing jaw, and Bateman had seen it before in a dozen different configurations across 30 years of Starfleet service. Truvok, target the Implacable's engines. Phasers only. I want her slowed down, not destroyed. Targeting solution in 3 seconds. A pause. Admiral, a precision strike on engine nacelles at this range will require us to hold steady for approximately 8 seconds. During that window, we will be stationary relative to the adjudicator's targeting solution. I know. Do it. The Enterprise came about with a smoothness that her Odyssey-class hull design made possible. A vessel built for deep space exploration had to be maneuverable, and her designers had made sure she was. And the phaser arrays on her secondary hull lit up with a coherence and precision that was genuinely alien to everything the Imperial gunners had been trained to counter. They were accustomed to turbolasers, which were powerful and somewhat blunt, like hitting something with a very energetic hammer. Federation phasers were different. They were precise in the way that surgery was precise, finding the specific frequencies that maximized energy transfer into a target's structural weaknesses. And Truvok had spent 6 minutes analyzing the Implacable's engine configuration from sensor data. The strike hit both engine nacelles in a sequence that lasted 2.3 seconds. The Implacable shuddered, her drives going from full military thrust to 20% capacity in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit her stern like a torch. She didn't stop. She was too big to stop quickly, but she slowed, and the jaw didn't close. The adjudicator fired again. The Enterprise took the broadside on her forward shields. 23% drop, Vorak reported, already rerouting power from non-essential systems. And Yoon pulled them into a roll that brought the ventral phaser arrays to bear on the adjudicator's bridge superstructure. Warning shot, Bateman said. The phaser beam crossed the adjudicator's bow at a distance of 40 meters, close enough to superheat the hull plating, nowhere near close enough to cause casualties. It was a message written in coherent energy. We can hit you when we choose to. The adjudicator held fire for 11 seconds. In the transporter bay, Galen Urso was sitting on a medical bed with a thermal blanket around his shoulders and Counselor Reyes beside him, and he was listening to the distant sounds of the ship in combat. The hum of shield impacts, the barely perceptible shifts in the deck as the ship maneuvered, with the expression of a man who had spent years working in a place where violence was always nearby and had learned to function through it. The flaw, he said. In the reactor design, I need to tell someone. I need to make sure someone knows. In case, you can tell me, Reyes said. It needs to go to the Alliance, to someone who can use it. He looked at her. The exhaust port on the primary reactor, the thermal oscillator feeds directly into the main power cell if the containment field is disrupted. One precise strike at the right coordinates. He stopped. I spent 3 years making sure no one would find it. I need to spend the next 3 minutes making sure someone does. Reyes handed him a pad. Write it down, every detail. In the briefing room adjacent to the transporter bay, Cassian Andor was on a secure channel to Alliance Command, transmitting a situation report that he suspected was going to cause Mon Mothma to sit down very carefully and breathe for a moment before responding. He kept it factual, because that was how he always kept things. Here is what exists. Here is what it can do. Here is what I think we should do with it. The Federation starship. The transporter capability. Galen Erso, alive and aboard. The Death Star schematics that Erso had saved to a datapad before Bodhi led him out of his laboratory. And his recommendation, Scarif. The data vault on Scarif held the complete technical readouts of the Death Star. Not Erso's embedded flaw, which existed in the weapon itself, but the full schematics that the Alliance's engineers could use to find it independently, to verify it, to build a targeting solution around it. Without those schematics, Erso's testimony was compelling but unverifiable. With them, it was a battle plan. Mon Mothma's response came in 4 minutes. It said, "Proceed. What resources do you need?" Cassian looked at the bulkhead of the Enterprise F, at the steady hum of a vessel from another universe that had arrived by accident and was, with increasing commitment, choosing a side. He typed back, "Everything you've got, and bring Jin." Jin Erso came aboard the Enterprise F at 0600 hours in a transport shuttle that docked with the magnetic clamps of the ship's secondary bay like it was trying to pick a fight with the hull, which Sarah Voss, who had flown escort from the Rebel rendezvous point, said was actually an improvement over Jin's normal docking approach. She materialized via transporter, which she had agreed to after Cassian had spent 4 minutes explaining it, and she had spent those 4 minutes looking at him with the expression of someone who was going to do the thing regardless, but wanted it on record that she found it unreasonable. On the pad, with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her eyes moving across the transporter room in the rapid, threat-assessing sweep of someone who had spent her formative years learning that new places were usually dangerous. Then she looked past the security officers and the counselor and found her father. What happened in the next 30 seconds was not something that Counselor Reyes recorded in her official log, because it was not the kind of thing that belonged in an official log. It was private in the way that only the reunion of people who had lost each other and found each other against all probability could be private. Reyes stepped back. The security officers looked at the wall. Even K2SO, who was standing in the corridor outside with Cassian, said nothing, which for K2SO represented a significant act of restraint. When Jin stepped back and looked at her father, really looked at him, cataloging the years and the weight and the change, she said, "You built it." "Yes," Galen said. "And you put a flaw in it." "Yes." She nodded. "Once. The way someone nods when they have decided to carry a thing rather than put it down. Then let's make sure it matters." The briefing that followed in the main conference room was the largest gathering the Enterprise F had hosted since the crisis began. Bateman and her senior staff on one side of the table, Jin and Cassian, and Bodhi and Sarah on the other. Galen Erso at the end, with his datapad, and the particular stillness of a man who had spent years waiting to say what he was about to say. K2SO stood in the corner and periodically offered probability assessments that nobody had asked for. Obi put the Scarif system on the holographic display. It resolved into a blue-green planet ringed with orbital defense stations and a surface installation that sensors, pulled from a Rebel intelligence file that Jin had brought aboard on a physical data chip, showed as a vast Imperial data vault complex, its towers rising from a tropical coastline like the fingers of a hand grasping at the sky. "The Citadel Tower," Cassian said. "Ground-level access is through a beach landing zone defended by AT-ACT walkers, shore batteries, and a garrison of approximately 9,000 Imperial troops. The data vault itself is in the upper levels of the tower. The schematics we need are in a specific archive bank. Physical data tapes, not networked. Someone has to go in and pull them manually. And transmit them," Jin added. "There's a dish array on the tower. If we can access the controls and realign it, we can transmit the schematics to a Rebel ship in orbit." "The orbital defense shield," Truvok said, advancing the display. "I've been analyzing it since we received the Rebel intelligence file. The shield is generated by a gate in low orbit, 2 interlocking emitter towers that project a planetary defense field. Nothing gets in or out without the gate opening. Imperial ships use a specific code transmission to request gate access." "We don't have the code," Cassian said. "No," Truvok said, "but we don't need one." He brought up a tactical overlay. "The The Enterprise's shields operate on a fundamentally different electromagnetic principle than the Imperial defense field. Our deflector array generates a subspace bubble rather than a directed energy screen. In theory, and I want to be precise that this is in theory, we can pass through the Imperial planetary shield without triggering its sensors, because we are not the kind of thing its sensors are designed to detect. The room was quiet for a moment. In theory, Bateman said, the margin of confidence is approximately 81%, Truvok said, which I consider acceptable for a combat operation of this nature. I consider it acceptable too, Jin said immediately. Nobody asked you, K2SO said. Nobody asked you either, Jin said. Galen Erso looked at the display, at the tower where his work was stored, at the planet where the evidence of everything he had been forced to do and everything he had hidden inside it was sitting in a physical archive, waiting to either matter or be forgotten. He said quietly, the schematics alone won't be enough. The Alliance's engineers will need to understand the thermal exhaust port configuration, the precise targeting window. I can annotate the files. If I come with you, you're not coming, Jin said. Jin, you're not, she said, and her voice had the particular quality of a decision that was not open for discussion. You're staying here. You're going to sit with the counselor, and you're going to annotate every file on that datapad, and when we get the schematics out, you're going to be alive to verify them. She held his gaze. I'm not losing you again to do the right thing. Galen Erso looked at his daughter for a long moment, and something in his face shifted. Not agreement exactly, but the recognition of someone who understands that the person in front of them has become, without their noticing, stronger than they are. All right, he said. Bateman had been listening to all of it with the focused attention of a commander assembling a plan from components she hadn't designed. She looked at Obi. Can we get a team down through the shield? If Truvok's analysis is correct, yes. Transporters won't work through a planetary shield of that configuration. We'd need to use shuttles. Modified shuttles, Vorak said from his corner of the room. I can adapt the deflector geometry on 2 Type 11 shuttlecraft to match the Enterprise's subspace bubble profile. It will take approximately 9 hours. You have 6, Bateman said. She looked around the table. Here's what we're going to do. The Enterprise goes in first, through the shield, providing orbital cover and drawing Imperial attention. 2 shuttles follow us through the gap, carrying the ground team to the beach landing zone. The ground team reaches the tower, pulls the schematics, realigns the dish. We receive the transmission in orbit and relay it to the Rebel fleet, waiting at the system's edge. She paused. The Rebel fleet is going to have to deal with the orbital defense stations and whatever star destroyers the Empire sends when they realize what's happening. There will be a lot of star destroyers, Cassian said. There will be a lot of star destroyers, Bateman agreed, which is why the ground team needs to move fast, and why we need every minute of those 6 hours. She stood. Vorak, get to work on the shuttles. Truvok, I want a full tactical profile of every Imperial asset in the Scarif system. Obi, I want to know the exact specifications of that dish array, frequency range, transmission power, alignment controls. Andor, Erso, she looked at Jin. Get some sleep, both of you. I need you functional in 6 hours, not heroic. Jin Erso looked at Admiral Bateman with the expression of someone encountering, for the first time, a commanding officer she might actually respect. You're a strange kind of soldier, Jin said. I'm not a soldier, Bateman said. I'm an explorer. We just ended up in the wrong place at the right time. She left the briefing room, and behind her, the Enterprise moved through the dark toward Scarif. The Scarif Shield Gate was a structure of Imperial engineering confidence. 2 vast towers joined by the invisible architecture of a planetary defense field, designed by people who believed that sufficient firepower deployed in sufficient quantity produced something indistinguishable from invulnerability. It had never been breached. It had never needed to be. The Empire did not build things expecting them to fail, which was, Truvok had noted in his tactical assessment, precisely the kind of institutional assumption that created exploitable gaps. The Enterprise F came out of the shadow of Scarif's moon at full impulse, running hot, every system aboard pushed to the operational ceiling that Vorak had spent 6 hours recalculating, and she hit the Imperial defense field at a vector that Truvok had computed down to the individual meter. The field didn't trigger. For 4 seconds, nothing happened. The Enterprise passed through the planetary shield like a thought through open air, her subspace bubble sliding between the field's detection frequencies with the precision of a key cut for a lock that didn't know it had a matching door. Then she was through, and Scarif's blue-green atmosphere was filling the view screen, and Truvok said, "We are inside the defense perimeter. Shield gate is closing behind us. The 2 shuttlecraft are through." "Time before Imperial response?" Bateman asked. "The orbital defense stations are repositioning. I estimate 4 minutes before the first targeting solution achieves lock. The Star Destroyer Persecutor is moving from her patrol position. She'll be in weapons range in approximately 7 minutes." A pause. "There are 2 additional Star Destroyers on long-range sensors. They were not in the Rebel intelligence briefing. Someone has reinforced Scarif." Bateman absorbed this without visible reaction. "Get me the Rebel fleet." The channel opened on a burst frequency that Cassian had negotiated with Alliance Command during the transit. Admiral Raddus, commanding the Rebel flagship Profundity, his Mon Calamari voice carrying the particular gravity of a commander who had committed to an action and was past the point of reconsidering it. "Enterprise, we're reading your position inside the shield. The gate is closed. We cannot get our fleet through." "I know," Bateman said. "We're working on that. Keep your fleet at the system's edge and be ready to move the moment the gate opens. You'll know when." "How will we know?" "Because," Bateman said, "it's going to be difficult to miss." She cut the channel and turned to Truvok. "Target the shield gate emitter towers. Both of them, simultaneously. Quantum torpedoes, maximum yield." Truvok looked at her with the expression of someone doing a rapid reassessment. "Admiral, destroying the gate towers will collapse the planetary shield entirely. Every Imperial vessel in the system will immediately recognize this as a hostile action of the highest order. The response will be overwhelming," Bateman said. "Yes, that's the point. The ground team needs time. The Rebel fleet needs an entrance. We're going to give them both." She looked at the view screen, at the towers visible now on long-range visual, elegant and enormous, and holding the sky shut. "Fire when ready, Commander." The quantum torpedoes crossed the distance to the shield gate in 8.3 seconds and hit both emitter towers in a simultaneous detonation that rewrote the local sky in white and gold. The towers came apart with a structural symmetry that was almost architectural, each one folding into itself from the point of impact, the defense field collapsing between them like a wave that had lost its shore. Scarif's sky opened. "Shield gate destroyed," Truvok reported. "Planetary defense field is down. The Rebel fleet is moving." What came through the gap was everything Admiral Raddus had. Every ship the Alliance could throw at a fight they'd had 6 hours to plan for, which was enough to fill the tactical display with contacts, and enough to make the Imperial commanders in the Scarif system understand, with sudden terrible clarity, that this had stopped being a security incident and become a battle. The Enterprise F was at the center of it. She fought the way Starfleet vessels were designed to fight, not with the brute force of a Star Destroyer's broadside, but with precision and intelligence and the constant adaptive calculation of a ship whose tactical systems were processing the battle at speeds that Imperial gunnery computers couldn't match. She drew fire deliberately, pulling Star Destroyer attention away from the smaller Rebel vessels that were less capable of absorbing it, her shields taking punishment that Vorak was managing with the focused intensity of an engineer, for whom every percentage point of shield capacity was a personal matter. The Persecutor and the Devastator, Drath's ship, which had followed them from Jeddah, were coordinating fire in the pattern that Truvok had predicted, trying to bracket the Enterprise against the planet. Bateman refused to be bracketed. She kept the ship moving, kept the angle unpredictable, used the planet's gravity well as a navigation tool rather than a trap, and every time one of the Star Destroyers committed to a firing solution, she was somewhere else, leaving the phaser arrays to deliver precise, punishing responses to engine sections and weapon emitters rather than hull plating. It was working. It was also, Vorak reported at the 12-minute mark, not sustainable, shields at 44%. The Enterprise had taken hits that would have destroyed a less robust vessel, and Vorak's voice when he reported the numbers had the careful neutrality of a Vulcan who was aware that the numbers were bad. On the surface of Scarif, the ground team was in the tower. Bateman knew this because Cassian's comlink had transmitted a single burst code, archive reached, 11 minutes after the shuttles had put them on the beach, which meant they had fought through 9,000 Imperial troops and 2 AT-ACT walkers and whatever else the garrison had thrown at them in 11 minutes. which Bateman filed away as a data point about the operational capacity of rebel ground teams. She was watching the tactical display when the comlink burst came through again. Jin's voice this time, tight with effort, and something that might have been elation. "We have the schematics. Realigning the dish. Stand by for transmission." "Obi," Bateman said, "get ready to receive and relay. The moment that signal comes through, I want it bounced to the rebel flagship on every frequency we have." "Ready," Obi said. Then the tactical display updated, and everything changed. The new contact appeared at the edge of Scarif's gravity well, like a bad idea arriving at the worst possible moment. Enormous, spherical, moving with the slow inexorability of something that had never been required to hurry, because nothing had ever threatened it. The Death Star, arriving at Scarif with the particular timing of a superweapon whose operators had been monitoring the battle and decided that conventional military response was insufficient. Truvok stared at his console for a moment with an expression that was as close to dismay as a Vulcan tactical officer permitted himself. "Admiral," he said, "the installation we identified near Jeddah has entered the system." Bateman looked at the view screen. The Death Star was resolving from a sensor contact into something visible. A gray sphere the size of a small moon, its surface a landscape of technology, its central dish beginning to rotate with a deliberate mechanical patience that meant one thing. It was targeting, not the rebel fleet, not the Enterprise. It was targeting the Persecutor, and then Bateman understood. Tarkin was here. And Tarkin, she had learned from 6 days of listening to Imperial communications, did not consider collateral damage a consideration. He was going to fire on his own ships if it cleared the battlefield. "All power to shields," she said. "Brace for shockwave." The super laser fired. The Persecutor ceased to exist in a fraction of a second, and the shockwave that followed hit the Enterprise F like the fist of something incomprehensibly large, slamming her sideways through space, overloading 3 shield emitters simultaneously, sending every unrestrained object on every deck into the nearest wall. The bridge lights went red. Vorak's voice came through the chaos. "Shields at 19%. Structural integrity holding. Warp drive coming online ahead of schedule. Repeat. Warp drive is online." And Bateman pulled herself back into her command chair and looked at the tactical display. The dish on the Citadel Tower was aligned. Jin's transmission was coming through. "Obi," Bateman said, and her voice was perfectly level, which was the most extraordinary thing anyone on the bridge had witnessed in 9 days of extraordinary things. "Relay that signal." "Relaying," Obi said. "The Profundity has it. They're transmitting to a smaller vessel, a consular ship, Alderaanian registry. The plans are aboard." The Death Star's dish was rotating again, toward the Profundity, toward Scarif itself. "Helm," Bateman said. "Get us out of the atmosphere. Maximum impulse. The moment we clear the gravity well, go to warp, heading away from the Death Star's firing arc. Best possible speed." "And the ground team?" Yun asked, her voice barely steady. Bateman looked at the surface of Scarif on the view screen. At the tower. At the transmission dish that had done its job. "Transporter range?" she asked. "Negative," Vorak said, and his voice was the only answer she needed. "We are too far. The atmospheric interference and the Death Star's energy signature." "Then we go," Bateman said. It was the hardest 2 words she had ever said. She said them anyway, because the plans were away and the mission was complete, and she could not save everyone, and the Prime Directive hadn't prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her for this. But she was an admiral, and admirals made the call, when the call was unbearable, and then they lived with it. The Enterprise went to warp. Behind her, Scarif burned. The Enterprise F dropped out of warp at the edge of the Sullus system and sat there in the dark for a long time. Nobody spoke. The bridge crew ran their damage assessments and filed their reports and did the necessary mechanical work of a ship that had taken significant punishment and needed to understand its own condition. And they did it quietly, with the particular silence of people who were processing something that damage reports couldn't quantify. 3 shield emitters destroyed. 14 hull breaches sealed by emergency bulkhead. Warp drive functional but running at 62%. Casualties. 17 injured. None critical. A number that felt simultaneously like a miracle and an accusation. Bateman sat in her command chair and looked at the stars. Counselor Reyes came to stand beside her after 20 minutes, which was how long Reyes had learned to give Bateman before the Admiral would accept company in the aftermath of hard decisions. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That was, Bateman had always thought, the particular skill of a good counselor, knowing when presence was the only thing required. The plans got through, Bateman said finally. It wasn't a question. Confirmed, Reyes said. Obi tracked the Alderanian consular ship until it went to hyperspace. The transmission was clean. Everything Galen put into those schematics, the flaw, the targeting coordinates, the reactor configuration, it's all there. Bateman nodded slowly. And Galen? In the medical bay. Dr. Chen has him on a mild sedative. He knows. Reyes paused. He asked about Jin. I told him the truth. Bateman closed her eyes for a moment. How is he? He's grieving, Reyes said. And he's at peace. I'm not sure those two things are contradictory. They weren't, Bateman thought. She had learned that much in 30 years of service, that you could carry loss and purpose in the same hands without dropping either, if you were careful, if you were honest about the weight of both. Cassian Andor found her in the observation lounge 2 hours later. He looked, she thought, like a man who had survived something and wasn't yet sure how he felt about that. He sat down across from her without being invited, which she didn't mind, and looked at the stars outside the viewport for a while before he spoke. The rebel fleet is regrouping at a rendezvous point in the Outer Rim, he said. Radis got enough ships out. The Profundity didn't make it, but the plans did. He paused. Mon Mothma wants to speak with you. Formally, Alliance Command wants to know what the Federation is and whether you're going to be a factor in this war going forward. Bateman looked at him. What do you think I should tell her? Cassian considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. I think you should tell her the truth, that you arrived by accident, that you made choices when you got here, that you're going home as soon as your engines are repaired. He paused. And that what you did at Scarif, what the Enterprise did, that's going to matter. The people who need to know what happened will know. It won't be in any history, Bateman said. No, Cassian agreed. But history isn't the only thing that matters. Sometimes what matters is that the thing happened. That someone made the choice. He looked at her steadily. You made a hard call on that bridge, leaving Scarif when you did. I know what that costs. You've made that call before, Bateman said. It wasn't a question either. More times than I'd like, he said. It doesn't get easier, but it gets clearer. The reason you made it, what it was for. He stood. The plans are going to reach the right hands. Someone is going to find that exhaust port. Someone is going to make it matter. A brief pause. Jin would have wanted that. He left without waiting for a response, which Bateman appreciated, because she didn't have one ready. Vorak restored warp capability to full operational status at 1400 hours the following day, which was 12 hours ahead of his most optimistic projection, and exactly on schedule according to his private timeline, which he had not shared with anyone because he found that people responded better to being pleasantly surprised than to being told the truth in advance. Bateman called the senior staff together one final time in the main briefing room. She looked at them. Truvok with his tactical precision, Obi with her scientific wonder still intact despite everything, Yoon at the helm console running pre-warp checks with the focused calm of someone who had grown up considerably in the past 9 days. Vorak with his engineer's satisfaction at a ship that was whole again, and she felt something that the mission reports would not capture and the official log would only gesture toward. We didn't come here by choice, she said. We didn't plan what happened, and we didn't execute a strategy that anyone back home approved. We made decisions in the field, based on what we saw and what we believed was right. She paused. I'm going to have to answer for some of those decisions when we get home. The Prime Directive isn't a suggestion, and I know that, and I'm going to have that conversation with Starfleet Command fully and honestly. She looked around the table. But I want to say this first. While it's just us, I believe we did the right thing. I believe the people in this galaxy deserved what we were able to give them. And I believe that the crew of the Enterprise Fiof conducted themselves with the integrity and courage that Starfleet represents at its best. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. She called a channel to the rebel frequency one last time. Mon Mothma's voice came through, measured, careful, with the weight of a leader who was already thinking about what the plans meant and what came next. Admiral Bateman, we owe you a debt that the Alliance may never be able to repay. You don't owe us anything, Bateman said. Just finish what you started. A pause. Will we see the Enterprise again? Bateman looked at the view screen, at the unfamiliar stars of a galaxy that had been, for 9 days, the most important place in any universe she'd ever known. I don't know, she said honestly, but I hope the Force is with you, whatever that means where you're from. She closed the channel. Helm, she said, set a course for the dimensional variance coordinates Obi has been tracking. Best warp speed. Course laid in, Admiral. Engage. The Enterprise F went to warp, and the stars of a galaxy far, far away stretched and blurred and fell behind, and somewhere ahead, through the mathematics of subspace and the improbable geometry of a rift that had opened once and might open again, home was waiting. In a small cabin on Deck 9, Galen Erso sat with a pad on his knees and wrote down everything he remembered about a flaw in a terrible weapon, because the people who needed it had it already, but he needed to write it anyway, needed to put it somewhere outside himself. And when he was done, he sat for a long time in the hum of a ship from another universe, carrying him toward a future he hadn't expected to have. The plans would reach Princess Leia, the flaw would be found, the shot would be taken. He didn't know any of that yet, but somewhere in the architecture of what had happened, in the chain of choices that had begun with a transporter beam on a rainy planet and ended with a transmission dish aligned against the sky, something had shifted. Something that the Empire, with all its star destroyers and all its stormtroopers and its planet-killing superweapon, could not shift back. Hope, it turned out, was harder to destroy than a planet. The galaxy remembers those who choose to act when action costs everything. The USS Enterprise F had arrived in a galaxy far, far away, without permission, without preparation, and without any guarantee of return. She had faced star destroyers with damaged shields, and a crew that had never trained for turbolaser fire. She had pulled a broken scientist from a rain-soaked Imperial installation and given him the chance to make his sacrifice mean something. She had opened the sky above Scarif when the sky needed to be opened, and she had made the hardest call that any commander makes, to leave, when leaving was the only move that preserved what had been won. The Death Star would fall, not because of the Enterprise directly. The shot that ended it would belong to a pilot from Tatooine following a feeling he couldn't name, but because a chain of choices held. Because Galen Erso had hidden a flaw and lived long enough to verify it. Because the plan survived. Because someone from another universe had looked at a planet killer and decided that the Prime Directive had limits. Admiral Joanna Bateman would answer for her choices before a Starfleet tribunal. She would answer clearly, without apology, and the verdict would be complicated and debated for years in Federation legal and ethical circles. She would say only this: they were going to destroy a planet. I had the ability to help prevent it. The rest is philosophy. In the galaxy far, far away, no official record would name the Enterprise. But among the survivors of Scarif, among the rebel crews who had watched an impossible ship open the shield gate and hold 2 star destroyers at bay while the plans got out, the story would pass from person to person in the quiet way that true things travel. Something came from beyond the stars. It chose to help, and because it did, everything changed.